So, good evening, or good morning, some of us. Tonight we come to the 23rd chapter in the Life Divine, The Devil's Soul in Man, first published in 15 June 1916 in the Arya. And there are a number of improvements or emendations that Sri Aurobindo made in the text, and we'll touch upon some of them as we go through over the next 2 or 3 weeks. It's a rather long chapter, so we may be breaking it up into 3 sections rather than 2, which we have done customarily. And he opens with mottos taken exclusively from the Upanishads this time. Originally in the Arya there were 2, a citation from the Isha and a citation from the Katha. He's added a pair, another from the Katha. Also, it's doubled in the Shvetasvatara Upanishad. And then a final one from the Taittiriya. The Taittiriya is perhaps the oldest of all those cited, and it stands at the last in this list. Here's what he's translated into English from these Upanishads. The Purusha, the inner self, no larger than the size of a man's thumb. He who knows this self, who is the eater of the honey of existence, and the Lord of what is and shall be, has thenceforward no shrinking. Whence shall he have grief? How shall he be deluded, who sees everywhere the oneness? He who has found the bliss of the eternal has no fear from any quarter. This quartet speaks to the reality of what our personal experience might be as we live and grow in the universe. The first, of course, is a metaphor. It isn't that there is a Purusha somewhere planted in the middle of our being, which is no larger than the size of a thumb. I have had friends and colleagues over the decades who were alarmed by this passage, saying, how could anybody believe that a soul could be no larger than the size of your thumb and be somewhere in your body? What sort of anatomical ignorance is this? These also are friends of mine who majored in English and knew what the use of metaphor and simile and analogic reasoning was, and yet could raise that question. The Upanishad in Sri Aurobindo does not mean that literally the size of the soul in us is no larger than the size of a thumb, that the inner self here, rendered in English as the inner self, Madhya Atmani, is the size of a thumb, Angushta Matra. It represents how concealed this secret entity is by all the play of nature on the front. When we turn to look for it, it's as if hidden, small, tiny, almost undiscoverable. But it is there. The second, I love that Sri Aurobindo really got this translation so deliciously correct. He who knows Veda, remember? The Vedas are the books of knowledge. He who knows Veda, this self, the Purusha, the true person within, who is the eater of the honey, Madhvadam, of existence, and the Lord Ishanam, of what is and shall be, has thenceforward no shrinking. This rather identifies this personal discovery that one makes of the deep soul behind, who really is the one who takes in all the sap of existence that we experience, delights in it, delectates in it, has no shrinking from anything, is afraid of nothing. He is identical in essence with the Lord, that great being who oversees all the operations of the cosmos, is immanent in it, and yet also stands transcendent to it, has thenceforward no shrinking. Vijugupsate. And that was from the Katha Upanishad also. Whence shall he have grief? Shoka. How shall he be deluded, undertake delusion, moha, who sees everywhere the oneness, ekatvam. And of course, we've met this in our study of the Isha Upanishad. This is the 7th verse from that. This is the foundational text, as you'll remember, to the whole philosophy of the life divine that Sri Aurobindo is presenting, because he found in the core of the Isha all the message that he wanted to convey. In 1,100 pages, it's there, and just almost a handful of verses in the Isha. In core, in essence. How can you be deluded? How can you suffer sorrow when you see everywhere that oneness? It calls you out of the tiny pocket of self that you possess, arrayed against this enormous universe, and into oneness with all. And then, where does the suffering go? Where does the delusion go? Where all the walls fall, and you see things as they are in essence, as you see them in that bright array, the universal depiction of what is that thing that cannot be said. And then finally, back to the Taittiriya, that Upanishad of bliss. He who has found the bliss, the anandam of the eternal, brahmano, anandam brahmano, has no fear from any corner. This is the foundation of fearlessness. This is abhaya, being seated in this bliss. When you are ensconced in that, when that is the whole of your experience, what can you fear? There is that oneness, there is that truth of your existence, there is that commonality, more than that, sharing the same self with all beings, manifest. All is there in that bliss. 3 of these Upanishads, the Katha, Shvetashvatara, and the Isha, are plainly theistic in their origination. The Taittiriya, expressing what is mystically impossible to express, claims neither impersonality nor personality is the final stance of that, but its unknowableness. I think we can begin with his first paragraph in this wonderful chapter, the double soul in man. The first status of life we found to be characterized by a dumb, inconscient drive or urge, a force of some involved will in the material or atomic existence, not free and possessor of itself or its works or their results, but entirely possessed by the universal movement in which it arises as the obscure, unformed seed of individuality. The root of the second status is desire, eager to possess, but limited in capacity. The bud of the third is love, which seeks both to possess and be possessed, to receive and to give itself. The fine flower of the fourth, its sign of perfection, we conceive as the pure and full emergence of the original will, the illumined fulfillment of the intermediate desire, the high and deep satisfaction of the conscious interchange of love by the unification of the state of the possessor and possessed in the divine unity of souls, which is the foundation of the supramental existence. So he has just summarized the previous chapter, the 4 stages of life's efflorescence or manifestation. Trying to get started through the movement forward of an involved will that pushes materiality's encasement to permit life to form and individuality to seek light. A second stage, desire, more and more pushing it forward. The third, love, which wants to both possess and be possessed, but also wants to enlarge, to reach out, to become part of the community, to bring cohesion to the whole that it finds inside itself when it finds the harmony of love. But none of these 3 things can be satisfied as they are stepping upwards from matter to life to mind, because they're all founded on the principle of division, originating from mind's first separation from the supramental so that it could fix forms in stadia. That perfection waits for us to achieve this 4th state where we rise to the supramental station. And there, founded in the supramental existence, we can experience the fulfillment of the cosmos. To continue, if we scrutinize these terms carefully, we shall see that they are shapes and stages of the soul seeking for the individual and universal delight of things. The ascent of life is in its nature the ascent of the divine delight in things from its dumb conception in matter through vicissitudes and opposites to its luminous consummation in spirit. So up we go. The soul's victory, then, is not just individual, but has cosmic placement and cosmic meaning. The soul is seeking for the individual and the universal delight of things. We are key to discovering it for ourselves, but also, in a sense, for unleashing it to full manifestation in the universal scheme. So, a large responsibility, no? The world being what it is, it could not be otherwise. For the world is a masked form of Satchit Ananda, and the nature of the consciousness of Satchit Ananda, and therefore the thing in which his force must always find and achieve itself, is divine bliss and omnipresent self-delight. Remember how important the term omnipresent is. It figures in the title of the first book of the Life Divine, the omnipresent reality. But that reality is not just existence, nor is it the movement forward through consciousness force. It is also the intended and originating experience of delight. Delight experiencing itself in existence results in the manifestation of this cosmos. Satchit Ananda. Existence, consciousness, bliss. Omnipresent. Since life is an energy of his conscious force, the secret of all its movements must be a hidden delight inherent in all things, which is at once cause, motive, and object of its activities. And if by reason of egoistic division that delight is missed, if it is held back behind a veil, if it is represented as its own opposite, even as being is masked in death, consciousness figures as the inconscient, and force mocks itself with the guise of incapacity, then that which lives cannot be satisfied, cannot either rest from the movement or fulfill the movement, except by laying hold on this universal delight, which is at once the secret total delight of its own being and the original all-encompassing, all-informing, all-upholding delight of the transcendent and immanent Satchit Ananda. To seek for delight is therefore the fundamental impulse and sense of life. To find and possess and fulfill it is its whole motive. So life is thus reflecting the will of the conscious force of existence as it pushes out into manifestation. Note again how this omnipresence is not obliterated by its being disguised in a world triply divided as we experience it, matter, life, and mind, but that omnipresence is securely there. Must be the source and the goal of all the movement. So delight must be the outcome of all the universal play and intended experience of all beings moving within it. So we have always originating our movement forward, delight. Delight is its cusp, is what we capture at the end. It is what we experience in the middle, and is what caused us to join the enterprise of the cosmos from the very beginning. But where in us is this principle of delight? Through what term of our being does it manifest and fulfill itself in the action of the cosmos as the principle of conscious force manifests and uses life for its cosmic term, and the principle of supermind manifests and uses mind? So he has been chalking out for us in recent chapters a map of the veiled Satchitananda, that consciousness force has manifested itself as the principle of life, that the supramental released itself into the finitude of mind. And he has to complete this picture for us. And he's assembling things, gathering these terms together in this pregnant paragraph. We have distinguished a fourfold principle of divine being, creative of the universe: existence, conscious force, bliss, and supermind. Supermind, we have seen, is omnipresent in the material cosmos, but veiled. It is behind the actual phenomenon of things and occultly expresses itself there, but uses for effectuation its own subordinate term, mind. So as Satchitananda has, in a sense, poured itself into the harmonizing and all-comprehending consciousness of the supermind and expresses itself through that, they form the quaternary of the divine existence, right? The supermind also stands here omnipresent in this world, but veiled, but uses mind as its agent of deliverance. Now he goes forward. The divine conscious force is omnipresent in the material cosmos, but veiled, operative secretly behind the actual phenomenon of things, and it expresses itself there characteristically through its own subordinate term, life. And though we have not yet examined separately the principle of matter, yet we can already see that the divine all-existence also is omnipresent in the material cosmos, but veiled, hidden behind the actual phenomenon of things, and manifests itself there initially through its own subordinate term, substance, form of being, or matter. Then equally, the principle of divine bliss must be omnipresent in the cosmos, veiled indeed and possessing itself behind the actual phenomenon of things, but still manifested in us through some subordinate principle of its own, in which it is hidden and by which it must be found and achieved in the action of the universe. So, supermind correlates to mind in the cosmos. Consciousness force correlates to life. Existence correlates to matter. To what does bliss, delight, correlate? Ananda must have its companion expression here in the cosmos. What is it? So now he tells us. That term is something in us which we sometimes call, in a special sense, the soul. That is to say, the psychic principle which is not the life or the mind, much less the body, but which holds in itself the opening and flowering of the essence of all these to their own peculiar delight of self, to light, to love, to joy and beauty, and to a refined purity of being. In fact, however, there is a double soul or psychic term in us, as every other cosmic principle in us is also double. So, the quick and easy thing is to say that Ananda expresses itself in the cosmos as the soul. We're speaking personally here, so in us, this is our core being. Obviously, also, the sense of the cosmic bliss is there in a cosmic soul as well. But let us remain with his argument for this go, and we'll come to the enlarged picture as we proceed through the life divine. So this secret self of ours, this bliss center, stands behind all, justifying the pursuit that mind, life, and body have in trying to get their full satisfaction from life. They can justifiably move towards their goal because they're authenticated by the presence of this bliss self in us. But back to his argument, and let me reread that last sentence. In fact, however, there is a double soul or psychic term in us, as every other cosmic principle in us is also double. For we have two minds. One, the surface mind of our expressed evolutionary ego, the superficial mentality created by us in our emergence out of matter. Another, a subliminal mind, which is not hampered by our actual mental life and its strict limitations, something large, powerful, and luminous, the true mental being behind that superficial form of mental personality which we mistake for ourselves. So, the enginery of our normal mentality, which is up here on the surface, is what we normally know as our mind. But there's something larger and more sublime behind. That mind, which is luminous, which meets the cosmos, as he'll say. So also, we have two lives, one outer, involved in the physical body, bound by its past evolution and matter, which lives and was born and will die. The other, a subliminal force of life, which is not cabined between the narrow boundaries of our physical birth and death, but is our true vital being behind the form of living which we ignorantly take for our real existence. So, we have that quite mortal vitality that sits in the front of our nature, and something more sublime again behind the line of our normal experience. Even in the matter of our being, there is this duality. For behind our body, we have a subtler material existence which provides the substance not only of our physical but of our vital and mental sheaths, and is therefore our real substance, supporting this physical form which we erroneously imagine to be the whole body of our spirit. So this would be the truth of our physical being. It lies actually behind this surface physical shell which crumbles into dust at the end of an incarnation. So this external physical being has a subtler physical substance behind. Our externalized and externalizing life force has a larger, subtler, more powerful vitality behind. Our mind, which is fixed on the operations of body and life and the little mentation that it knows itself, is a throwing out of a larger mind. All of these subliminal parts of our nature are larger and more wonderful, and as he will say next, akin and leaning into that secret spiritual self which we are. So too, he writes, we have a double psychic entity in us. The surface desire soul, which works in our vital cravings, our emotions, aesthetic faculty, and mental seeking for power, knowledge, and happiness, and a subliminal psychic entity, a pure power of light, love, joy, and refined essence of being, which is our true soul behind the outer form of psychic existence, which we so often dignify by the name. It is when some reflection of this larger and purer psychic entity comes to the surface that we say of a man, he has a soul. And when it is absent in his outward psychic life, that we say of him, he has no soul. This surface desire soul is what people normally call the soul. And you'll find that to be true even when you go back to ancient philosophy. They were identifying that thing which was most operative and visible in us, and leaving often undescribed, as if it were unknown, that most secret self within which stirs forward through the life's machinery, through the body's machinery, through the mind's machinery, and wants to taste the world, wants to experience it. Now, if I can pause here for a moment, I want to show that Sri Aurobindo has allowed to stand here almost as he first wrote it, this entire passage. It has become one of the facile observations about Sri Aurobindo that he really developed his theory of the psyche and the psychic personality and the psychic being from the 1920s onwards, after Mother had rejoined him from Japan. And it is true that there is a new prominence in the importance of the psyche as it figures in the practice of the yoga once Mother and Sri Aurobindo have reunited in 1920 and begun to work towards the manifestation both in their personal lives and in the lives of the community, the great principles of the integral yoga. But you can see here, Sri Aurobindo clearly is writing about this psychic entity here in 1916. Now, Mother, by this time, is in Japan with Paul Richard. But this is an important truth which has its place in the scheme of the cosmos, and Sri Aurobindo is giving quite clear articulation to it here. No doubt it was the Mother, when she joined and met Sri Aurobindo in 1914, who brought with her this teaching of what is the psyche from her years of study with Max Tillon, pardon me. This, in a sense, brought a rounded perfection to Sri Aurobindo's own summary view of the cosmos. He accepted the principle of the psyche into the cosmic scheme, which in his view had been largely dominated by Vedanta, which places little emphasis on the individual soul. But here, clearly, the psyche then becomes key to the cosmos. It is the psyche in whom this principle of divine delight is present. We must fix upon this as a crucially important passage in the life divine. To continue then, the external forms of our being are those of our small egoistic existence. The subliminal are the formations of our larger true individuality. Therefore are these that concealed part of our being in which our individuality is close to our universality, touches it, is in constant relation and commerce with it. The subliminal mind in us is open to the universal knowledge of the cosmic mind. The subliminal life in us to the universal force of the cosmic life. The subliminal physicality in us to the universal force formation of cosmic matter. The thick walls which divide from these things our surface mind, life, body, and which nature has to pierce with so much trouble, so imperfectly, and by so many skillful, clumsy physical devices, are there, in the subliminal, only a rarefied medium at once of separation and communication. So in our subliminal nature, we are in conscious interface with these universal portions of our being. Remember, we cannot exist as individualities without our being communally part of the universal. We are part of the universe. And here in the subliminal, our mind, our personalized mind, leans into the universal. Our personalized life leans into the universal prana. And our physicality even feels itself one, throbbing, sensate with all that moves in the physical, the manifestation of matter. So, there we have a point of demarcation where we can, in a sense, chalk out or carve out our own individuation within the larger context, but also commune with the universal. So we're not shut off from it. The subliminal is that important part of our nature. So too, he writes, is the subliminal soul in us open to the universal delight, which the cosmic soul takes in its own existence and in the existence of the myriad souls that represent it, and in the operations of mind, life, and matter, by which nature lends herself to their play and development. But from this cosmic delight, the surface soul is shut off by egoistic walls of great thickness, which have indeed gates of penetration, but in their entry through them, the touches of the divine cosmic delight become dwarfed, distorted, or have to come in masked as their own opposites, because we're too small to receive them as they are, you see. So, our subliminal soul is that which is in communion with the universal as well. So, the universal delight is experienced by the universal being, but it also experiences delight in the myriad souls. And what does myriad mean, by the way? Myria from the Greek means 10,000. But in common parlance now, essentially means numberless. So we'll say in the existence of the numberless souls that represent that cosmic being. and how they interrelate with each other, moving through the cosmos. But the walls of ego divide these myriad souls from their actual experience, and so only a little of the delight comes through in jets, in rivulets, and we don't feel it in its oceanic entirety. And when we do get them, sometimes they come in disguised as their opposites because we aren't large enough to experience something except as pleasant or unpleasant. So if it comes to us, we have to distinguish between the two, and sometimes it's so big that it seems unpleasant, so powerful that it seems asuric and no longer daivic. It follows that in this surface or desire soul, there is no true soul life, but a psychic deformation and wrong reception of the touch of things. The malady of the world is that the individual cannot find his real soul. And the root cause of this malady is, again, that he cannot meet in his embrace of things. And the root cause of this malady is, again, that he cannot meet in his embrace of things outward the real soul of the world in which he lives. He seeks to find there the essence of being, the essence of power, the essence of conscious existence, the essence of delight, but receives instead a crowd of contradictory touches and impressions, trying to find the soul in the world, you see, instead of within, leaning out. As Upanishad says, you know, the gates of the senses are turned outward. We come out here rushing forward to see what we can find that's real and valued. But the soul is inside, and as we go rushing out, we ignore its reality here. If he could find that essence within, he would find also the one universal being, power, conscious existence, and delight. Even in this throng of touches and impressions, the contradictions of what seems would be reconciled in the unity and harmony of the truth that reaches out to us in these contacts. So it is in our inner being that we swell into communion with the universal. Obviously, we can't grab it all out here with our limited arms, with our limited senses. We can't embrace it that way. It is only in our conscious being that we can become one with the whole. So we have to find that in us which can become one with it, and it is this psychic truth, this bliss center, this drop of bliss identified with the light in the center of our being. To continue with Sri Aurobindo here. At the same time, he would find his own true soul, and through it his self, because the true soul is his self's delegate, and his self and the self of the world are one. This perhaps needs a little unpacking. Our true soul is our individual truth. We are a drop of that bliss from the divine. But the soul is a manifestation of the self, he seems to suggest. The soul is the self's delegate here, moving in space and time. That self we could identify with the Atman, and later we'll more specifically identify it with both Atman and Jivatman, the individual expression of that universal transcendent self. But here, let us keep it simple. The soul, at the center of our being, moving through the conditions of time and space, represents this self. But this, he writes, he cannot do. because of the egoistic ignorance in the mind of thought, the heart of emotion, the sense which responds to the touch of things, not by a courageous and wholehearted embrace of the world, but by a flux of reachings and shrinkings, cautious approaches or eager rushes, and sullen or discontented, or panic or angry recoils, according as the touch pleases or displeases, comforts or alarms, satisfies or dissatisfies. So, without being fixed in our inner being, that wall of ego which separates us from all things prevents us from responding correctly to the touch of the universe. And so we have these many reflections in our experience of pleasure, pain, desire, repulsion. We rush towards something, we shrink away or flee for our lives. We're exhilarated, we're seduced, we're horrified. It is the desire soul, Sri Aurobindo says, that by its wrong reception of life becomes the cause of a triple misinterpretation of the rasa, the delight in things, so that instead of figuring the pure essential joy of being, it comes rendered unequally into the three terms of pleasure, pain, and indifference. So we're not large enough to receive it as it comes and see that it is all part of a wave of delight that's coming to us. So we experience in terms of how we are divided. So it pleases us if it doesn't overwash us. If it's too much for us, it displeases us. If it's somewhere in the middle, we hardly notice it. We're indifferent to it. We have seen, when we considered the delight of existence in its relations to the world, that there is no absoluteness or essential validity in our standards of pleasure and pain and indifference, that they are entirely determined by the subjectivity of the receiving consciousness, and that the degree of either pleasure and pain can be heightened to a maximum or depressed to a minimum, or even effaced entirely in its apparent nature. Pleasure can become pain, or pain pleasure, because in their secret reality, they are the same thing, differently reproduced in the sensations and emotions. Indifference is either the inattention of the surface desire soul in its mind, sensations, emotions, and cravings to the rasa of things, or its incapacity to receive and respond to it, or its refusal to give any surface response, or again, its driving and crushing down of the pleasure or the pain by the will into the neutral tent of unacceptance. In all these cases, what happens is that either there is a positive refusal or a negative unreadiness or incapacity to render or in any way represent positively on the surface something that is yet subliminally active, suggesting that the soul is happy to meet it, but this desire soul on the surface cannot respond, can offer only inattention, can offer only the dualization into pain and pleasure, and so doesn't get it right. We are living in our smallness, in our compression, incapable of largeness. But in the large, as the Chandogya Upanishad says, is the happy. The small is unhappy. So the invitation is to growth. I think we may have come to a place where we can pause for the evening. We'll put our bookmarks there and continue with this next session on the 26th of July. I'm sorry to have to stop. It's just getting good, isn't it? But I'm happy to take you to Savitri, which is something beyond description. I think I'm going to read tonight and perhaps in coming weeks a long section from Book 7, the Book of Yoga. This is Canto 2, entitled The Parable of the Search for the Soul. And you'll recognize these large themes as he develops them. What he says in pages and pages in the Life Divine, he renders into exquisite blank verse here. But this is only matter's first self-view, a scale and series in the ignorance. This is not all we are, or all our world. Our greater self of knowledge waits for us, a supreme light in the truth-conscious vast. It sees from summits beyond thinking mind. It moves in a splendid air transcending life. It shall descend and make earth's life divine. Truth made the world, not a blind nature force. For here are not our large diviner heights. Our summits in the superconscious blaze are glorious with the very face of God. There is our aspect of eternity. There is the figure of the God we are. His young, unaging look on deathless things, his joy in our escape from death and time, his immortality and light and bliss. Our larger being sits behind cryptic walls. There are greatnesses hidden in our unseen parts that wait their hour to step into life's front. We feel an aid from deep indwelling gods. One speaks within. Light comes to us from above. Our soul from its mysterious chamber acts, its influence pressing on our heart and mind, pushes them to exceed their mortal selves. It seeks for good and beauty and for God. We see beyond self's walls our limitless self. We gaze through our world's glass at half-seen vasts. We hunt for the truth behind apparent things. Our inner mind dwells in a larger light. Its brightness looks at us through hidden doors. Our members luminous grow, and wisdom's face appears in the doorway of the mystic ward. When she enters into our house of outward sense, then we look up and see above her sun. A mighty life self with its inner powers supports the dwarfish modicum we call life. It can graft upon our crawl 2 puissant wings. Our body's subtle self is throned within, in its viewless palace of veridical dreams that are bright shadows of the thoughts of God. In the prone obscure beginnings of the race, the human grew in the bowed, ape-like man. He stood erect, a godlike form and force, and a soul's thoughts looked out from earth-born eyes. Man stood erect, he wore the thinker's brow. He looked at heaven and saw his comrade stars. A vision came of beauty and greater birth, slowly emerging from the heart's chapel of light. and moved in a white, lucent air of dreams. He saw his being's unrealized vastnesses. He aspired and housed the nascent demigod. Out of the dim recesses of the self, the occult seeker into the open came. He heard the far and touched the intangible. He gazed into the future and the unseen. He used the powers earth instruments cannot use, a pastime made of the impossible. He caught up fragments of the omniscient's thought. He scattered formulas of omnipotence. So, let us push for the emergence of that secret soul of delight in us all. Namaste. I salute that divine soul in you. Jai Ma.